Hi, this is week 1, English 122. This is the online section. This week we are going to be talking about working through the writing situation and audience. And I also want to review critical reading, critical analysis, and basic argument. So we're going to start with the writing situation. When we look at a text as a reader, and we're going to vacillate between readers and writers. So you're taking the role of both in this class. You're going to analyze other people's writing as a reader, and you're going to be writing for other people. So what I want you to think about when you're doing your reading as a reader, and then you'll transfer this into your writing skills. Think about as a reader the categories we call the writing situation, and this comes from a textbook that Pikes Peak used to use. I pulled 5 of the most critical elements that we look at, and the 5 categories that I have, and I also have it up on D2L under the writing situation. It's a separate written out text. The writing situation that we look at is genre, and a genre is referring to a categorization or a type of writing. For example, a letter, a poem, a song, lyric, a movie, a short subject, a documentary, an essay, an opinion piece. Those are all genres. Well, the reason why we look at genre is if an author is saying they are going to be writing a letter, you can expect certain things from that generic convention, what we call the generic conventions of that genre. So for a letter, you expect the letter to be written to somebody. You look for a date or some kind of time reference in that letter. You look for a signature. Who is this from? You look for certain things. There's more of a personal approach, a personal tone to it. If you're looking at a genre that's like a children's story, you would expect appropriate language. You would be surprised if you saw profane language. So there's a children's textbook that's called Go the F to Sleep. It's certainly not really the target audience is children, it's for adults. So that's one of those things that catches your eye. That generic convention is broken, so it catches your eye. Like, what's going on with this? So we want to think about genre, and when an author plays with breaking the conventions, we want to look at what's going on with that. That's part of our critical analysis. Now, when you are writing as an author, when you are playing with genre, what are you doing? Are you staying true to form? Is that where you're going to tuck in your modes of criticisms or calling attention to something? Or are you going to go purely by generic form and say, okay, this is going to be a poem and this is the type of poem I'm going to write. I'm not going to break form, but I'll tuck my purposes, my critiques, things that I'm trying to do in this, I'll tuck it in other places. So genre is the first category of the writing situation. The second one we talk about is purpose. What is the purpose of the text? So if an author is writing to you and saying, Dear voter, you can anticipate that that purpose is either to get you to contribute to the campaign in some way, to vote, or to make a decision one way to support that particular candidate or an issue, a topic. If there's something that's amiss, dear voter, I really think it's important for you to go to church. What? How is that? Wait, there's something strange going on here. So purpose can make you catch your mind. Sometimes another thing about purpose is if somebody says, I am trying to convince you to buy this product. If there's something not aligning with the rest of the statements towards that purpose, you can make a critical assessment and say that that was not a persuasive argument because the purpose was to try to get me to buy this thing, and I have no reason on earth to buy that. You have not successfully persuaded me. So we want to look at purpose. Sometimes a purpose is seemingly one thing. Like for children's books, I love using children's books as examples. If any of you have Dr. Seuss in your life, either as a parent or remembering fondly, or you still enjoy Dr. Seuss writing, One of the things you say is, oh, he's funny. He's a funny children's book author. He tries to get you to think about topical things. If that's the purpose, that's one level. But what if he's addressing telling parents to be better parents or telling kids to be better kids? Maybe it's preaching in addition to entertaining. Maybe it's just purely entertainment. So there are multiple levels. Is it entertain, to persuade, to teach, um, to somehow convince in some way? Looking at purpose is important too. Third category of the writing situation is the subject. Sometimes that is the easiest thing to type, but sometimes it can be sleight of hand. For example, some of the reading that we have, like the letter from Birmingham jail, the subject is, I'm in Birmingham jail. This is Dr. Martin Luther King's text. I'm in Birmingham jail. What is the purpose of his letter? What is the subject? So the purpose is to educate and persuade his audience in some way. But what is the subject? Is the subject about Birmingham jail, or is it about the whole story of segregation in the South? Is it about civil rights? Is it about tucked in Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolent direct action program that he has put in place and why he was invited to Birmingham to speak? So there's a lot of levels to think about with subject as well. Audience is probably the trickiest because you can identify who you think the audience is. When you're writing a letter, dear mom, mom is your audience. But what if you happen to also know that mom will share that with dad? There's another audience lurking in there. Or what if there's no presumed audience? All y'all. Figure everything is written to all y'all and then narrow it down. What if it's supposed to be for somebody, but you couch it in different terms to somebody else? So you want to think about that audience, and you also want to think about, as you're writing, the audience's role as a reader. They're trying to take control of the text and understand and create its meaning, just as you as an author are trying to create its meaning. So it's like a push me, pull you between you and the audience. So if you don't know who your audience is or imagine who your audience is when you're writing, your work will be weaker because you need to have authority. You want to control and claim authority. I'm the authority. You can't have my text. You can learn from my text. You can dwell in it, but I invite you in and I will show you what you need to know. An audience is sitting there, and unless you're engaged, you've done this a million times. I've read the page a million times, and I can't get past the first sentence because they're not engaging you. They haven't identified, called you in as the audience. So we want to think about audience. Another and probably the hardest thing to think about as a writer is context. Context is the who, what, when, where, and why. What is the situation in itself? So the writing situation looks at the writing situation, which sounds, silly to say it that way. But when the letter of Birmingham jail is written in the 1960s, the early 1960s in America in the Deep South, that tells your reader, your audience, a lot of things by knowing the context. If your reader doesn't know Birmingham, Alabama, and they just see Birmingham, they might think Birmingham, England. This letter is not at all about Birmingham, England, and so they might not understand, they might misunderstand. So context is important in establishing it for your reader when you are writing. I'm talking about Birmingham now, I'm talking about this text, this now, this person. If you leave the context bare and up to the audience to figure out for themselves, they might misinterpret and you won't succeed in your goal. So you want to look at context. Context can also give you clues about the effectiveness of a text. It can give you clues about the culture. You can make some statements. For example, if I'm going to be doing a cultural analysis of the United States in the 2020s, one of the big things that was announced this week was that the Kardashians are no longer having Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Shock, horror, consternation. Oh, we're going to miss it. But what is that saying about the United States? That we're tired of these folks. Are we tired of them? Are they tired of us? Are they tired of trying to perform? There's so many levels of context going on there. Is it COVID that caused this to happen? Is it they lack their audience now? They don't have the sponsorship? So many questions that you can answer about a time or a place. You can make a critique just by looking at a context of something. So that's the writing situation. Play with these ideas when you're reading it. Break those categories down and see if you can identify these components, because that will give you a fuller critical analysis when you're doing your analytic work. And then as a writer, go back and review these categories so that you make sure that you have those under control, so you know exactly who's my target audience. You might slip up and say, well, I forgot about Sally down the street, but you really should know who your audience is, who your target is, what's your target genre, those kind of things. So keep those contexts in mind of the writing situation, the 5 categories. We talked a little bit about the audience role, but that's probably the most important thing in your writing as somebody who is making argumentative writing, which is what this course is about. You want to think about what are you arguing to? Who are you arguing to? What's the purpose? If you can't say, I'm trying to convince you or persuade you, I'm trying to be effective, then the audience has nothing to do with it. It's just flat. But if you can imagine who your audience is and then engage with that audience in some way, like, you know what? I'm going to show you why I'm the authority on this. And I challenge you to think about this with me and try to claim this text. It's almost like, oh, I'll get in a tug of war with you and we'll have fun with it. But if you can keep thinking about that audience's role, and when you are an audience, when you are reading or even watching a performance of something, hearing something, what do you expect? What are you expecting from that text that is coming to you, either orally with your ear or visually, sensory? What are you thinking? What are you expecting? And does the author disappoint you in some way? Does the composer, thrill you in ways that you didn't expect? So think about your role as an audience and your role as a writer, author, rhetor, which is someone who is specifically about rhetoric. So we'll talk about audience a little bit more next week. And then the final things to think about this week about for critical reading and analysis. I want you to look at when you're reading, you go beyond the simple. So yes, I read and I understand what it's about. What it's about is not as interesting as how it is about. How does it work together as a whole? Are you finding anomalies in there? Are you finding errors? Because generally an error is sometimes it's because it really just slipped by. But sometimes a deliberate mistake is purposeful. We want to think about that. Why did they put that there? Why is this something strange right here when one of these things is not like the other? Remember Sesame Street? Think about those things that seem to be interesting, strange, and revealing. Really think about that. Come back in the text, mark it in some way, annotate some way to come back to that and think about, why did this happen here? What's going on with that text there? Thinking about what is present in a text, but also what is absent. If an author says, oh, I've got all this stuff here, what didn't they put in? Why didn't they put it in? Because that could be an interesting argument in itself. What you're really trying to do with critical analysis is you're looking about, does this author create a text effectively? Is he or she creating something, he, she, they, are they creating something that is an effective text because they've controlled all these elements? Or are there things that they call attention to subtly, and why? Why are they doing that? So not just is it effective, but why? Is it ineffective? Is it sometimes effective and sometimes ineffective? And then when we look at rhetoric, the art of persuasion, when they're trying to persuade you to do something, are they persuasive and why? Or persuasive and unpersuasive and why? So we want to look at those mixtures. So we'll come back to those things as well, but keep that in mind when you're reading, marking those texts up for looking for those anomalies. And the final thing I want to tell you for this week is we want to think about basic argument. Any kind of argumentative writing is based on a formula. And I know that sounds strange for an English class because we think of formulas for mathematics or computations. But when we're writing, if you follow a formula, a basic formula to get your basic argument or critical argument, any kind of even extended arguments, books, whatever, however length it is, if you can keep this formula in mind, you will serve yourself very well because you've already mastered the structure. So it's the structural, the foundation elements of writing. And the first thing is having a title that hooks your reader, that grabs their attention. So you want to make sure you have an effective title. You want to have 3 kinds of paragraphs. Your intro paragraphs, it can be a single or several depending on the length of the project. You want to have a conclusion paragraph or paragraphs depending on the length of the project. And then the internal paragraphs are called the body paragraphs. Each type of paragraph we'll explain throughout the semester. We'll go on in other classes, but each one does a different thing. So an intro paragraph contextualizes for your audience, contextualizes the situation at hand and what your argument will be. So your thesis is your argument, what I am arguing, what I hope to prove. Your body paragraphs move into having an effective transition, linking effectively from point to point. They develop your thesis out into thesis points, and they usually start with a strong either thesis point or a beginning sentence of your body paragraph. The topic sentence is often what's called. You want to have a smooth transition and then go into that topic/thesis point. Then you do claims and evidence. Claims, evidence go hand in hand. They're not separate. So this claim, this evidence I'm using to prove this claim, to support this claim, which supports your thesis point. And then I'm going to interpret that evidence. If I'm using quote, a direct quote, I'm going to interpret that quote for the audience because I don't want the audience to wander around mentally trying to figure out what I'm doing. I want to tell them exactly what they need to do with the evidence I gave them to support the claim I stated that is meant to support and prove the thesis point. So body paragraphs, transition, thesis point, claims evidence, interpretation. And then your conclusion paragraphs. Recontextualize. This is where we've been. This is what we were doing. Restate your thesis. Therefore, this is what I've proven. And then give your audience a so what. I call it the so what with a question mark. It's the ultimate thing that's at stake with your audience. Why do you want your audience? What do you want them to do? So a so what is usually the last sentence or the last few sentences of an argument. You can see this in a lot of writing. Really good writing, you can see it. You can see what the author is asking of you. Asking you to do something, to think about something, to change. There should be something urgent. There should be something relevant and poignant about that so what. It shouldn't just be like, and so I think you'll like it, so okay. It should be something really urgent, something that you're passionate about. I need you to go vote. I need you to read this text. I want you to think about. You can be that first person to say, I think you should. I urge you to. Or you can be more gentle. You can go back. Everyone needs to see this book. I want you to change. We need a greener planet. We need a dirtier planet. We need more dogs. We need less dogs. Whatever you're doing, it needs to have some kind of urgency and a specific action in mind for that audience that you have in mind as you start reading. So all together, we're reviewing writing situation, genre, purpose, subject, audience context. The audience, thinking about the relation between the audience and the author, and the text, the audience's role. We want to look at critical reading and analysis. You're looking for interesting, strange, revealing, anomalies, what's going on, what's present, what's absent. We want to look about, is it supported? Is it framed well? Is the argument really all over the place, or is this really well written? And then, is it effective, ineffective, persuasive, unpersuasive? And the final thing is that formula for good, strong argumentative writing. Title that hooks your reader in, catches their interest. Intro paragraph, contextualizing who, what we're talking about, where, when. Thesis, your basic argument, that's in the intro. Body paragraphs, thesis point, topic sentence, transition, all 3 in the same first part. Claims, evidence, interpretation of the evidence. Conclusion paragraphs, recontextualize. Therefore, that's what we're looking at in these places this time. Restate your thesis and give your audience a so what so they can go off and do. You're giving them responsibility for the argument. Here, I'm turning it over to you. So now I'm turning it over to you. Apologize for the length of this lecture. I certainly hope you're enjoying the first week of classes. Please let me know if you have any questions.